Welcome to Brick by Brick. Join me, Loren Wernette, as I share my personal journey of building a thriving real estate and hard money lending business from the ground up. Along the way, we'll explore the strategies, challenges, and breakthroughs that come with growing wealth. Whether you're a seasoned investor or aspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the world of private lending and real estate, this podcast is packed with actionable insights, real-world stories, and mindset tips to help you build your own path to success brick by brick. Welcome to another episode of Brick by Brick. I'm your host, Loren Wernette. Today we have an excellent guest with us, Mike Russell. Mike has a fantastic story about some of the hardship he's gone through, and we hope that it can help somebody out in the audience that may be going through something like this. Mike has started a nonprofit to help people that are going through the foreclosure process and to help get some of those pains out of their life. I'm just really excited to have him on the podcast and talk through what he's gone through, what he started, and how he can help others. So Mike, thanks for being on today.
Grateful for the invite, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. So I gave a real high level overview of who you are, but can you tell us who you are in your own words and maybe start going down the path of how you got into this space and what some of those pain points were along the way?
Sure, man. Well, listen, I'm just a guy who turned my own life around and who finds great reward in helping other people do the same. I've been in the real estate business my whole life, really since I was 19. It's the only real job I ever had. And, I had a lot of experience in various entities as it related to being in the real estate business. I represented banks for a long time, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and I would go and witness lockouts once the bank foreclosed, back in 08, 9, 10, 11, 12, and witnessing what happens to families once the bank puts that final hammer down and literally shows up to the house in a box truck with a couple movers and a sheriff and says, we're going to change the locks. Everything you can fit in that truck, you can take. We'll store it for 30 days, but you're out of this house. I probably witnessed that 200 times. And so I kind of started to see the other end of this real estate thing and how it affects people once they face struggle. And so that always resonated with me the more I did it. But the real resonating came from my own experience in this stuff. I made a lot of really poor decisions in the heyday of real estate, 04, 05, 06, 07, really mistook cash flow as wealth, really, and just kind of naively thought that it would never end, and that certainly didn't become true. And so I had leveraged myself in so many different ways where once the market tanked and the economy tanked, I simply couldn't keep up with my monthly responsibilities. And it forced me into a place where I was foreclosed on. I filed personal bankruptcy, corporate bankruptcy, and really created more collateral damage in and around my family than I would care to admit. It took me the better part of 10 years to remedy that collateral damage, getting other personal assets attached with deficiency balances after foreclosures and really creating some struggles that literally took me a decade to remedy. So this stuff is very personal and true to me, and I understand what people are going through. The uncertainty is really the killer to the average consumer, and here I am, a guy in the real estate business, and the uncertainty was killing me. And I knew more than the average consumer for sure, or certainly should have. And it's that uncertainty of not really knowing where to turn and what to do once you begin to fall behind on mortgage payments and everything else that keeps people up at night. It's really not a fair fight. It's not a fair conversation between a big bank and the average American homeowner. It's just not. Banks follow dates and their rights to a T. They have a complete understanding of them, and the consumer typically doesn't. And so after, 26 years or so in the business, real estate is like anything, you do anything for 30 years and it can get a little monotonous. And so I kind of put some people in place in my real estate firm that I trust to run the day to day, so I could break off my time and spend the vast majority of my time focused on this nonprofit whose sole mission is to just help people have a softer landing than I did. And with a little bit of proactive attention and trust, you can have a softer landing, certainly than I did. My landing was anything but soft. It was abrupt, hard, and I ended up living in places I didn't want to live for the better part of 5-7 years after I had both a bankruptcy and a foreclosure as a public event on my credit report. I have a newfound respect for credit all these years later. That's for sure.
So let me play that back just a little bit. So you're in the kind of the heat of the real estate market pre-bubble 2008. You were buying a lot of stuff. You got yourself fairly heavily leveraged and basically ran into a cash flow issue where you got foreclosed and went through a bankruptcy, both personal and corporate. But you mentioned during that you thought that you just kind of get through the bankruptcy, get through the foreclosure and kind of get out of the pain, reduce some of the pain on yourself. But you caused yourself a lot of what you called collateral damage. Can you talk through some of that collateral damage that may not be isolated to just you and your circumstance, but what others might feel if they go through something like that?
But yeah, man, it was, the collateral damage that was done, I wasn't the collateral damage, it was my family that ended up being the collateral damage. My parents, my sister, I got divorced in the process, my ex-wife. They're the ones that suffered the collateral damage in the wake of chaos that I really created. And just as an example, the house I grew up with got saddled with something in the neighborhood of $500,000 in deficiency balances on commercial buildings after they were foreclosed on. And so the house that I grew up in, the house that was my parents' primary residence, got riddled with liens, executions for the deficiency balance left over once the foreclosure, there was just, took me 10 years to remedy that problem. And the financial collateral damage is one thing. It's the emotional collateral damage. It's the relational collateral damage. It's the tremendously poor judgment and decisions made selfishly at the long-term expense of others. That, money had nothing to do with that turnaround. That was just changing as a human being less self-seeking, less selfish, and having some accountability, and not making decisions that damn well can hurt people. And so that turnaround in my own life is trust me, the only reason I'm sitting here today in the position I'm in. Without it, I certainly wouldn't be. But that's not enough. Turning my own life around really wasn't enough for me. What keeps me, frankly, healing is playing a small role in other people's lives, helping them turn their lives around. That's the reward to me. This stuff is tremendously elementary to me all these years later, right? Dealing with banks, finding retention options for people who are behind on their mortgage. They're a limited number. It's a handful of different retention options. What people fail to recognize, me included back then, and most people today that I deal with, is that the very entity that is threatening your home is the one that can help you. Most others can't. It's the entity, it's the mortgage company themselves. And with some effective communication, the crafting of a great assistance application and request for hardship assistance, all that kind of stuff is kind of elementary to me. I can do that while I'm doing 12 other things, right? And it's not tremendously challenging. Most hardships are similar. Reduction in income, job loss. There are some, obviously, God forbid, but the health issues, the death of a spouse, of a partner, things like that. Banks understand hardships and they will work with you. And so that piece of it is pretty elementary to me and simple. And there's a buffer between me and the consumer, the homeowner, and the bank. And that buffer it's relatively emotionless to me in the grand scheme of things. I say this all the time. I can't even call my cable company and deal with them about my DVR not working because it's mine and it's affecting my life, right? I get pissed off. I'm going to place you on hold for another 40 minutes, this kind of thing. But when I'm dealing with someone else's lender, where I don't have the burden of that person's past and their decisions and everything else that's going on, it's tremendously matter of fact. I'm not exuding emotion. I'm not being resentful. I'm not angry. I'm not frustrated. I don't possess all of those things that the person who's being threatened does. And that emotional buffer really goes a long way in how I can effectively communicate with banks. I understand this situation, what needs to be done, but I also don't carry that emotion. So it's tremendously rewarding. It's pretty simple for me. The rest of what I do, really the most of what I do, if I'm being completely honest, is I spend the vast majority of my days trying to help people get out of their own way, because that's what we are. We get in our own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're carrying a lot of, as the person that's going through that, a lot of worry, a lot of shame, a lot of things that don't leave you making the best decisions, maybe. And like you said, the big guys, they do this all the time. Big banks do this all the time. And so you're coming in at a severe disadvantage. It's just like just about anything else. If someone does something 5 times a day and you do it once a year, you're going to be at a very big disadvantage when it comes to doing that thing.
Yeah.
So I think maybe let's spend a little bit of time talking through how a normal foreclosure process works, what can be expected, and then how your group comes in to help fix some of that, or get in the middle of it to stop that end outcome of losing your home.
So here in the state of Massachusetts, really everywhere in the country, the first legal step that a bank takes is they hire an attorney to represent them in the foreclosure proceeding. That attorney runs title on the property to kind of see what kind of situation there is. And they probably start doing some assignments, and they make sure that there's no missing discharges or missing signatures on any title documentation to make sure that it's clean title, relatively at least marketable or insurable title. And so the first thing they do is they file, essentially the Soldier and Sailors Act, which is it's a federal protection for people who are in the active military, and they record that notice publicly. And that notice effectively says, if you are in the active military, show up on this day at this court and let us know, and we will stop the proceeding effectively. And so everyone who gets that letter is petrified that there's an auction, and there isn't an auction imminent. It is the first legal step. And it's typically 45 days. That court date is typically 45 days in the future. So if you get that thing on June 1st, it's safe to say your court date's going to be July 15th. And the reality is the bank cannot take the next legal step in the foreclosure process until after that date has passed, because, you either missed the date or you are not in the active military. Once they satisfy that piece, they can move on and take the next steps. This is where that is your most prime time, as soon as that notice is filed, to get proactive, pick up the phone, and try to get back in the good graces of the bank. Because if you don't communicate, you let that date pass, every bank is different, and depending on title issues, there will be a foreclosure auction scheduled within about 60 days of that date passing for your court date. So all in, you're about 105 days. If you do nothing from the moment that action is taken, you're about 105 days from, sadly, 50 guys and gals being in your front yard and bidding on your property. So this is where we do our best work, is in that first 45-day period is a simple phone call to the bank. Listen, I understand we've fallen out of the good graces. We want to get back in your good graces. Faced a temporary hardship. I will be able to resume my normal payments. I just need some help with the arrearage. And I've seen banks help with arrearage anywhere from $12,000 to $189,000 this year alone. $189,000. We had someone who was 4 years behind. And the bank did what's called a partial claim mortgage on that. And what that really is that's HUD, that's Housing and Urban Development, coming into these servicers. And so this kind of help is available to almost anyone with an FHA or a Freddie Fannie Ginnie-backed mortgage product. If it's sold out in the secondary market, you could have a lot more options to avoid a foreclosure and get assistance from the bank. That partial claim mortgage, what happens is HUD comes in and pays the servicer and the investors the arrearage amount. A silent second is recorded on title at 0%. So you are essentially storing your arrearage at 0% into the future. You're not forgiven that money, but you don't have to make payments on it. And you only have to pay that off when you either refinance, sell the property, or the loan matures. That's the best avenue for just about anyone who's facing this struggle, and you are most likely to get that sort of assistance if you act within that first 45 days of the Soldier and Sailors Act being recorded on your property.
Can you define arrearage for the audience so they don't know?
Missed payments, past due, right? Arrearage it's interest and penalties is all it is. It has nothing to do with principal. It's just missed interest payments, penalties on top of that. And the longer it goes on,
you have $100,000. Yeah, you have $100,000 mortgage. You missed 4 months worth of payments, so you got $7,000 of missed payments plus few fees. Maybe $10,000 of arrearage on that note, essentially.
And that's what becomes overwhelming to the people, right? It's overwhelming to get a statement. It's crazy to get a mortgage statement every month. In the top right-hand corner, it says amount due $8,200. Wait a month. Wait 2 months. Amount due $16,000. And what the struggle with this is, people rarely have no money, and they'll just try to call and make a payment. I'd just like to make a payment. I'm sorry, we can't accept the payment. Pay us $16,802.39, pay us nothing. And that's what happens once you once you get to 4 months behind, the bank is done. They will not accept a single payment. You have to pay the entire amount past due or nothing. And that's where people get overwhelmed and they start to get in their own ways. I just can't do this. And they don't really have a great understanding of, I just need to call my bank and explain my hardship and fill out an application, provide some supporting documentation. This isn't a forensic audit. It's basic supporting documentation, a couple months bank statements, 30 days pay stubs, listing of your expenses, the people who live in the house. Is there a non-borrower contributor, meaning someone who is not on the mortgage but contributes to the household, verifying their income. Some relatively basic, to me, I guess, relatively basic supporting documentation and application process with a hardship letter, and you can move mountains with those things and literally get back in the good graces. And one of the most important things today is you can retain your original mortgage terms. The vast majority of the people I am working with have 2 and 3% fixed 30-year mortgages. To have a housing transition, to leave that, if your mortgage payment is $1,100 a month and you're at a 2% fixed rate with 26 years left on the note, you don't want to lose that in today's environment. To rent anything comparable to what you're leaving would cost $2,500 in rent. And so the value and the power of being able to keep that fixed rate mortgage, something I certainly didn't understand all those years ago either, but that being able to help someone put off the arrearage out into the future, get back to resuming their normal payments and stay in a long-term fixed product at a very low interest rate is, what's more rewarding than that? And a lot of the people that I talk to don't truly even understand the value of that until it's sort of explained to them and shown to them.
Yeah. So from a banking perspective, you got a borrower that's in default, they're going through this process. What is the benefit to the bank of getting you, the customer, to go through this process and not foreclosing on the home?
No bank in America wants to foreclose. There isn't a single one. They want to foreclose less than you want to be foreclosed on. They want the original debtor to stay in place. They do not want to risk the very, banks have gotten hip over the years, especially 08 to 13. They live in fear of real property being abandoned, falling into disrepair, having squatters move into it. That's why the bank hires people to go do assessments of properties once payments are missed, take photos, confirm occupancy, or send a preservation company in there to change the locks if it's vacant and lock it up. No bank wants to be in the real estate business. They do not want to own real estate. They just want to have it as a security instrument. And so they want to work with you. They want to keep you in that home, get you back on track, keep you in place. It costs banks in Massachusetts, it costs the bank $25,000, $30,000 to foreclose on a property without taking into account any falling into disrepair, becoming abandoned, having squat, without taking into account any of that. It costs them a fortune. These law firms, they're not cheap. You know what I mean? A bank, I got to assume a bank is the very best client of any law firm in the country. They don't usually complain about invoices.
Yeah. And as a lender myself, I can 100% agree with, I have no desire to take the properties that I'm lending against because my business is to cycle money, right? And it's outside of my business model to take a property and have to do something with it. And it's a massive risk to take something to auction because let's say I'm owed $200,000 and I take it to auction and someone pays $130 for it, right? That's $70K right off the balance sheet. And so I'd much rather work with something. And so even me as a very small lender is more willing to work with a borrower that's being communicative and has a plan versus someone that, just goes totally dark on me and just kind of puts their head in the sand.
Yeah, it's scary. Lenders don't like no communication. When there's no communication, they don't miss a step. They get right to the auction as fast as humanly possible. And I can tell you right now that this year alone, more than 80% of the people we're working with are in very high LTV FHA loans. And they purchased in 21, 22, even 24. I am seeing a problem on the ground floor that is much akin to what already happened in this country. We seem to have a horrendous memory in this country. You know, we just do. We either we're just in denial or we're delusional. I'm not really sure, but the same things continue to happen. You know, they lowered the FHA credit score back during COVID. Property appreciation skyrocketed. So you're talking about people that were first time home buyers that bought at a relative height of the market in some 4-year phase of a height, with very little money down or a grant and no experience in home ownership. Very different from when you stop paying your rent. And those are the people that I'm seeing having the biggest struggle right now. Fresh, new homeowners that got into that. Like, I'm not ready to completely say it, but I'm getting close to should have never been a home buyer in the first place.
Interesting.
I've said that before in my life. And I actually thought I wouldn't say it again.
Yeah, I don't have the data to agree or disagree, but I certainly see some signs like that, right? That, there was a massive amount of homes that were bought. The housing market just appreciated so fast, and there was such a big rush to go and buy a home, be a homeowner. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of people that are struggling to make the payments because they bought houses that, 5 years ago would have been half the price of what they bought them for.
And think about, look at it like this, right? This is a new kind of shadow inventory, in my opinion. It is an artificial propping up. And look at the entity that's doing it. This year alone, we're probably at like 75 partial claim mortgages, right around there, between 70 and 80 partial claim mortgages, which is a government entity, HUD, coming in and, for lack of a better term, bailing out a consumer this time who fell behind on their mortgage, taking government funds, paying the servicer to prop the homeowner up and keep them in their home. How's this end, right? If you play it forward, like that one that I was just talking about, we did I can't remember if it was $179,000 or $189,000 partial claim mortgage. These people bought the property in 2022, and they haven't made any real payments. And here's something crazy that they'll do. FHA loans will allow you, I think the number is up to 30%. So even if your arrearage is only, let's say, $50,000, you have available to you in that partial claim allotment up to 30% of your principal balance to have HUD pay, store at 0%, not to be dealt with until the future, so you can effectively shrink your mortgage payment by reducing your principal that bears interest, store it over here with government funds, not to be dealt with until later. What they're doing is they are putting people through this program. It's a great way to stay in your house. There's no question about it. But what they are doing is putting people in an immediate negative equity position. Immediate negative equity. If you put 3.5% down and you miss payments for 18 or 20 months, and you get a partial claim and you bought at a relative height of the market, how many negative equity people are sitting out there that when the time you talk about just a 5% blip in property values, and all of these people are immediately in negative equity. One of the other struggles that I'm seeing is a lot of these people that we help are in trouble again in 6 months.
Yeah, so let me play that back so everybody understands that. So someone bought their home for $100,000, right? They put $3,500 down. So they are already at a 97% LTV. Now they get behind, let's say $10,000. The government's willing to come in and bring $30,000, essentially is what you're saying, get in a second position at 0%. And so they're behind 10,000. They bring 30,000 in. So now that house has a $100,000 note on it plus a $30,000 note on it. And you've put $30,000 in. So you've now got a home that's worth 100, but has like 120 some $1,000 worth of debt on it. So that house now has to appreciate like 20 some percent just to get to break even, where you're not, if you try to sell it, you're not bringing money to the table when you sell. That's terrifying as a society that thinks, and most of our society thinks, that our home is our number one investment vehicle, right?
Yeah. It's and look, this is politics to some degree. No matter who the administration is ever, I would consider it a fair statement to say every administration ever wants to push problems off to the next administration, right? It's politics 101, right? And what I've been seeing now for the last 3 years is a whole lot of pushing off problems into the future, just pushing them off, right? Let's prop it up. And it's concerning, it's like true free market. These people would have been foreclosed on, or they would have had to sell. But we prop them up, but put them in a poor financial decision situation in the future where the only way to sell this asset would be a short sale, right? Which we really have done away with. It really, I couldn't get a short sale approved in the last 10 years to save my life. But right now, we probably have 10 under contract of true, legitimate short sales that are underwater. The market will not bear. And that's a significant increase from the last 10 years. And so it's, whatever, the powers that be, whoever they are, whenever they are, whatever the administration, I don't care about affiliation or any of that stuff. It's just, if you're taking government money to keep people in properties and keep them out of foreclosure, that's an artificial prop up of some sort. And I don't know how long that will last. Who knows if this new administration even knows that this is happening right now, but who knows what they're doing. And who knows how long that stuff will work, but it makes me feel like I'm seeing from the ground level up, from consumer base up, like, wow, I can't believe HUD, I can't believe these banks are doing it. It's outstanding for these people. They're in a 2%, 30-year fix. They get to keep their house. But man, you play the whole tape forward and I see us kind of brushing under the rug a potential problem for some time in the future, whenever that is.
Yeah. Do you have any concept or idea of how big this program is nationally and how many houses have gone through it? And
I don't know how many houses have partial claim mortgages, but I know that I research title on a daily basis ad nauseum, and there are a whole bunch of them in Massachusetts, a whole bunch of them. And they give you multiple bites at the apple. That's the whole point with this, right? So I said that a lot of these people get back in trouble in 6 months. And I'm probably dealing with 10 people right now who we already got a partial claim mortgage from. Not everybody takes that full 30%. Like, think about that. The FHA guideline, excuse me, is they will allow up to 30% of your equity, your principal to be put over here in this HUD partial claim mortgage. But if you only have like 7% in arrearage behind, and a lot of people just choose to do the 7%, it's the people who want to lower their payment that opt to take the whole 30%, because then your payment is lower and it's more affordable. But if I do something with someone at a 7% of their total principal is in arrearage, they use up 7%, they still have 23% available. So you can go back and take another bite at the apple in 6 months, take another 7%. You can just keep in perpetuity up to the 30%. And it isn't like it feels like sometimes it feels like we're just headed to get to the 30% and then everything's going to go to hell. And it's almost like renting. It's almost like the mindset is I'm just keeping my housing until, and then I'm getting evicted, I guess, is what I get afraid of.
They're just kicking that can down the road.
Yeah, and look, the human condition is at play here, right? And that's really what this is all about, and that's what I'm talking about talking people out of their own way on a regular basis, is trying to give them all the information and get them to understand. It's kind of like a course in getting out of your own way, getting rid of the denial, getting rid of the blame. I see quite a bit of blame. There are, percentage-wise, I would say there are far less true victims, right? And look, I had a PhD in being the victim, so I get it, and I don't judge it. I understand, I empathize. But true victims are, I got cancer, my wife died, right? Those are victims. But the percentage of people who believe they're victims, too many fingers, not enough thumbs, right? So there's a lot of this accountability stuff. Oh, the bank, they did this wrong. And the problem is that there's no one out there really helping this. I'm certainly, what we're doing here is definitely rare, right? And once that public notice is out there, that Soldier and Sailors Act, all the sharks come out, right? And again, no judgment, whatever. Everyone's got a business model. I get it. But there are attorneys in Massachusetts who will send these form letters that say, I've reviewed your mortgage documents and I believe the mortgage company wronged you and I can sue them. And I tell these people, well, you just call that guy up and ask him if he'll do it on a contingency fee basis. Let me know what he says. And, it's like, send me $5,000 and I'll sue your bank. It's like, you know what I mean? And so there are sharks out there, that people who are just honestly just seeking to capitalize on the perceived misfortune of others. Period. Stop. That's just what it is. Mm-hmm. And whatever. I get it. It's capitalist society. It is what it is. No judgment. The problem is the consumer hears that. These people who are doing this are tremendously well-spoken, and they're doing this for a living, and they get these consumers to a place where they believe their bank wrong. It's the bank's fault. I haven't made my mortgage payment, and bank's fault. And, so that's where they're talking people out of their own way, a little bit of accountability, a little bit of understanding. Man, listen, you signed a document, you know what I mean? You signed a document. It's your responsibility to hold up your end of the bargain. Now that you haven't, the very best course of action is to go ask for some help, not sue them.
So, yeah. So when you're working with your clients and you're looking at that 30%, what are you generally recommending? Let's say they are 7%. Do they take the 30 and just do one shot and hope they fix it? Or do you kick the can further down the road?
I've only done that one time. It was a 2-family property. They just bought it. I can't remember if it was 21 or 22. Horrible situation. Man living in the house had abused the children in a horrible manner. And she was really up against it. And she had nowhere to go. And she had an opportunity to take the full 30% and make it affordable for the kids. The man's off in prison. Do it. Stay here. Stay safe. Do your thing. Very, very rare one-off cases that I would actually encourage someone to do that, right? And oftentimes, a lot of this is a 3-way call with the bank, right? That's how this all starts. Hey, let's make a 3-way call. Give them authorization for me to speak. I'll start asking the questions. We do a little pregame, etc. All these banks are the same. If it's a secondary mortgage market out there, it's we're going to go down the waterfall of different options that you may qualify for. And they always mention the 30% thing. It's the last thing that they mention. And we usually just say, look, we just want to take care of the arrearage. We just want to take care, we can resume normal payments. And that's the fair bargain that the bank asked for, right? It's like, look, we'll help you with the past due. We understand temporary hardships. You must be able to prove that your hardship has since passed and you have remedied it, because it's essentially reverse underwriting. When you get a mortgage, you go to underwriting, they make sure they vet you and they make sure that you're a fair bet, you're going to be able to make the payment. When you fall behind and you're telling them you can resume normal payments if you just help with this arrearage, that's the fair bargain. They say, look, in about 60 days from the moment we finalize this, we expect you to resume your normal payments, and then you'll be back reinstated. You're good to go. And so it's really just a function of being able to prove that through the supporting documentation, pay stubs. So if your hardship isn't over and you can't prove it, like let's say the most common thing is I faced a temporary reduction in income for whatever reason, whatever that is. Someone in the family stopped working, my hours got decreased, whatever it is. Well, prove to me you're back on track, right? What's your gross income every month? What are your expenses? They do a little algorithm math in the back end. Okay, this guy's going to be able to resume his normal payments. The people whose hardship has not ended, tremendously challenging to get assistance, retention assistance. Every bank will offer, I don't want to say every, but like 99% of banks will offer assistance for people who have fallen into default. And there are 2 buckets. There's retention assistance, which is like partial claim, repayment plan, reinstatement, pay the full amount of arrearage due plus any fees all at once. Loan modification, modify the terms, very challenging today because today's rates, whatever, 6.5%, 7%. You're coming out of a 2, it's not really going to help you. And then there's non-retention assistance. Every bank will offer non-retention assistance. The struggle is no one wants it, right? We'll do a deed in lieu, which once in my 30 years, I've seen someone do a deed in lieu. Short sale, because you're underwater, and we'll help you by we'll sign off on selling it for less than what's owed. And then obviously a traditional sale, just sell traditionally and pay off the debt in full and keep your equity. People who can't prove in some reasonable fashion that their hardship has ended are really forced into that situation. I believe the 2 worst things to do in America as it relates to finances and credit are bankruptcy and foreclosure. Those 2 public events will follow you for 6 to 7 years, and you effectively become unbankable in the traditional lending environment. Foreclosure and bankruptcy foreclosure is the last option. Bankruptcy is the second to last option, and there's always a better way. If you can sell and put money in your bank, and that's the great thing about this ridiculous 43% artificial inflation over the last 5 years. These people, never before in my life did I think that I would be able to say, yeah, you can not pay your mortgage for 18 months and walk away with a bag. Like it just doesn't happen. You know what I mean? But it's crazy. We do that occasionally. We had a person in Woburn, Massachusetts that hadn't paid their mortgage in 27 months, sold the property, got a check for $200,000+ for more money than they ever had in their life. When in the history of real estate has that ever happened? It doesn't happen. But this ridiculous artificial, I say artificial because unless you sell, it's not real, has put people in a place where you can be in a big problem with your bank, but you can still convey title and walk away with plenty of money. And sometimes that's the softer landing that I'm talking about, right? I couldn't have made worse decisions. I got foreclosed on and then filed bankruptcy. So the bankruptcy didn't even put a stay on the auction. I waited till I was foreclosed on. Then I filed bankruptcy. I walked away from that whole situation with no money, none. To be able to have a housing transition, which is disruptive and abrupt and challenging, and people look around, they've been in the house for 20 years, and the idea of leaving is just not an option. But leaving with 6 figures in the bank assures a softer landing than leaving with no money and bad credit. There is no harder situation to go try to convince a landlord when you're bankrupt and you got foreclosed on that you're a good bet, and you can, that's when you end up trying to offer the landlord, I'll pay you 2 years in advance, and you put yourself in a situation very hard to do with no money. So every situation is different, but if you're looking for non-retention options in an economy, a market, a real estate market like this, they're advantageous. And I continue, it's hard to get people to understand the true finality of, look, if you don't do something, there will be 50 people in your front yard in the near future. You will not own your home anymore. You will be forced to leave, and you will have no money to find your next housing situation. That's often challenging to get people to see that as a real threat. And one of the reasons is COVID. A lot of these people were in trouble during COVID, and it lulled everyone to a false sense of security. Like, I haven't paid any of my bills. There's no threat. And because a lot of times these foreclosures take forever, if they've been in trouble multiple times, they feel like, I'm going to figure this out. Nothing happened last time. And until that real moment comes, that's when you really know. And that's what witnessing those lockouts all those years ago. Boy, that's real, man. When a box truck and the sheriff show up and they change the locks on your house after they take all of your stuff unpacked and not ready, throw it in a box truck, that was... I'm hopeful that we never see something like that again in our lifetimes, because that was true tragedy. A lot of people will do bankruptcy, and I'm certainly not a bankruptcy attorney. I know as much as a guy who went through it himself on multiple levels. I know some bankruptcy attorneys. We talk about it all the time. And there are plenty of bankruptcy attorneys who are hounding these people and, you should file bankruptcy. In very rare instances, I would recommend it. It puts a stay on the auction, and you could file bankruptcy a week before the scheduled auction, and you can put a stay on it. But what a lot of people don't understand is that you're going to file a Chapter 13 in that situation, and that's a reorganization of debt. It's not a liquidation, so your debt isn't clear. They pile up all your arrearage and any credit cards, whatever else. They put it in a pile, they cram it down, and within about 90 days, 60, 70, 90 days of filing bankruptcy, the court is going to demand of you, okay, now you need to make your mortgage payment on time, plus you need to pay the bankruptcy trustee every month this amount of money for 3 to 5 years in the future. And so I've known a lot of people, unfortunately, who pull that emergency trigger on the bankruptcy, believing it's, I can stop this auction, I'll file bankruptcy, and then they end up getting foreclosed on in the near future anyway, and the bankruptcy case gets kicked out because they can't keep up on their current mortgage payment plus a payment to the bankruptcy court. Very rarely is it a good idea. It's better than foreclosure in most instances, but I rarely recommend it. And it's I've seen it happen look, if you can't afford your mortgage payment, how do you think you're going to afford your mortgage payment plus paying $773 a month to the bankruptcy court? But we fail to play the whole tape forward when we are faced with this uncertainty and this urgency. Is the reality of it is we're looking for a relief valve sometime, and that's the human condition. We all are. I certainly was when I went through it. I was looking for a relief valve. And I didn't have enough information at the time or knowledge or experience to be able to navigate these things. And I'm just really grateful that I do today, and I can help other people do it.
So I think that leads into a perfect transition into the question I ask everybody in this podcast is, if you knew what you know now when you were, say, 18, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? Or if you want to, you can say, if you know what you know now, what would you tell your children when they turn 18?
Live within my means. Live within my means. Play the whole tape forward. See the long game. When you're 50, you're not going to want to work. Never mind 30. When you're 60, you're not going to want to work as hard. Live within your own means. Yeah. Put other people before yourself. That's what I would tell myself. I doubt I would have listened, but I would have said it all the same.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in both those statements, especially that I doubt I would have listened, because the things I would tell myself now when I was 18 certainly wouldn't have listened. I wouldn't have had the experience or the mental hooks to even know what the hell I was talking about, right? But I think it's an interesting thought experiment to go through, especially as I'm in the process of raising small children and how I want to teach them. And maybe if I tell them 100 things, they pick up on one. So just hope it's the right one.
That's right. You got it.
So, all right. So if people are going through this, or if people want to learn more about you or your nonprofit, where can they find you, and how can you be of help?
Sure, man. They can go to my site. It's hardship.org. You can go there and learn anything you want about me and my story and the things that we do, and hear some successes. You can call me direct, 508-501-5800. Anytime.
Awesome. And I will make sure all those links and your phone number are in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out to Mike, they've got a question about this, I encourage you to reach out. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's going to know a lot of things that you're not going to know. And honestly, in this situation, knowledge is always power, and communication is key.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm always happy to do it. I'm talking to a few guys right now that in the California wildfires, man, tragic, natural disaster plays a big role in some of this stuff in various places in the country. Florida, I know, has been eviscerated the last couple of years. And these guys in California, they are just in an impossible situation. The house there's nothing there. There's not even a chimney left. The chimney's on the ground. And they have an $850,000 liability on this property. The insurance company came out and wrote 2 checks, one to the homeowner themselves for $58,000 for living expenses, and one for $450,000 to the insurance company and the homeowner for the sole purpose of rebuilding. But it cost $1 million to rebuild. You can't take that $450,000 and pay down your $800,000 balance. You have to use that money to build. It cost $1 million to rebuild the house. You'd be underwater if you did it, because you already owe $800,000. These people are in very, very challenging situations. I have a distinct belief that 3 or 4 entities are going to make a tremendous amount of money on what's going on out there, because they're going to buy these things short or buy them at auction. They're really just charred lots. It's a pretty sad situation. So no matter where you are, man, I'm always happy to talk. Hit me up. Tell me a story. Yeah.
Well, it was great having you on, Mike. If anybody wants to reach out to Mike, please do so. And I really appreciate your time and your story.
Thanks, man. You too. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning in to Brick by Brick Wealth Building Conversations. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more people find the show. For more tips, resources, and updates on my journey, follow me on Invest with Loren. Let's keep building wealth, one brick at a time. See you next week.